Hey everybody, this is the video you have all been asking for, our complete and detailed review on the Tesla Model 3. I mean the Model Y, because they look an awful lot alike. Really, this is just the crossover version of the Model 3. In a similar vein that the BMW X3 is the crossover version of the 3 Series, although the DNA between the Model 3 and the Model Y is certainly a lot closer than what we see in the X3 and the 3 Series, perhaps a little bit more like the 3 Series GT. And this reminds me an awful lot of that no longer made BMW model. But before we broach the question of is this a crossover or is it a lifted liftback, let's talk about the competition. We obviously have the all-new and upcoming Ford Mustang Mach-E. That is truly going to be the most direct competitor. We of course have the Jaguar I-Pace, the first entry in this compact luxury two-row crossover segment. Then we have the Mercedes-Benz EQC, also a direct competitor to this, but a little bit more conventionally styled. It is basically just an electric GLC. Then of course we have the Audi e-tron, which is kind of sort of a competitor because it is half a step larger than this. It really is more of an electric competitor to the GLE and the BMW X5 than the Model Y right here. The Model Y was designed to be a direct EV replacement for the average compact luxury crossover, something like a BMW X3, Audi Q5, or Volvo XC60. This is closely related to the Model 3 and it looks very much like the Model 3, but if you park them one next to each other, you'll notice that this is just a little bit bigger overall. It's a little bit taller up front, a little bit wider as well. If you were hoping that the Model Y would be a boxy, practical three-row crossover, then you may be a little bit disappointed. The realities of creating an electric vehicle with the amount of energy stored on board that we have even in this long-range version means that aerodynamics are incredibly important, and that's why we find this profile right here, which definitely is more liftback or sportback than hatchback. So this definitely looks quite different than, for instance, the Toyota Highlander that is right next to this Model Y at the moment. But back to the Model Y, you'll notice that the overall profile is really suspiciously similar to what we see in a Chevy Volt or a Hyundai Ioniq or a Toyota Prius or a BMW 3 Series GT, the one that's no longer made. That's because this is a very efficient profile, and having that boxy styling that we see in the Toyota Highlander is going to reduce efficiency. The Model Y is at the long end of the luxury compact crossover segment. This is about 3 inches longer than a Mercedes-Benz GLC or a Jaguar I-Pace, a little bit longer also than a Volvo XC60 T8 plug-in hybrid. But this is about 3 inches shorter than the Audi e-tron because that is a little bit larger. That's really more of a direct competitor to, for instance, the Mercedes-Benz GLE. When it comes to power figures, Tesla is sort of pulling a page out of Rolls-Royce's old book and simply calling it sufficient or not really commenting on it at all. Instead, we get performance figures for particular Tesla Model Y trims. And in some ways with electric vehicles, that may be the best way to think about things because horsepower and torque figures really depend on exactly what you can pull from the battery when, and 0 to 60 figures are probably a better way to go about this as well as overall range figures. So if you get the absolute base version of the Model Y, which is not on sale yet, they promise 5.9 seconds, 0 to 60, that's for the standard range battery pack, that'll get you 230 miles. If you get the bigger battery pack, which is essentially the same battery pack that we find in the longer range Model 3, that should be good for up to 300 miles and 5.5 seconds, 0 to 60. If you get the rear-wheel drive version, oddly enough, getting the all-wheel drive dual motor version will not only improve your 0 to 60 performance, 4.8 seconds quoted for this model, but it'll also improve your range, 316 miles. If you get the Model Y Performance, that is the bat-crap crazy version of this. That'll go 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. We're talking Charger Hellcat kind of 0 to 60 times, and that will give you 315 miles of overall range. If you get the Performance Upgrade version of that, that'll drop the range down to 280 miles, but it gives you a higher top speed. Although there's a lot of guessing out there, at this point in time, we do not know exact motor specifications, which is kind of an interesting twist for Tesla. But I'm not too surprised by that because we see something very similar going on with Toyota and their latest hybrid systems where they're not really telling us how much power is going where. Charging happens via this little door right back here integrated into the tail lamp module, and there are 2 different onboard chargers depending on whether you get the standard range battery or the extended range battery. The smaller battery has a slower charger, 7.7 kilowatts. This one has an 11.5 kilowatt charger, which is among the fastest chargers available on board for an EV today. Like the rest of the Tesla model lineup, it also supports supercharging via the same port up to 250 kilowatts if you get the bigger battery pack, up to 150 if you get the smaller pack. It's worth noting that this is the Tesla proprietary charge connector in the US. If you get one of these in Europe, it's going to have the standard CCS charge connector that the rest of the EVs in Europe get, but that's not required in America, so they're allowed to have their proprietary connector. That does mean that at least at the moment, you cannot charge this with a CCS station. According to Tesla, the Model Y has been rated to tow up to 3,500 pounds. Towing is not terribly common in the compact luxury crossover segment, but the competition, wide-ranging competition, will generally tow 1,600 pounds to up to about 7,700 pounds, depending on the version that you get. Now, the key thing to know about towing with any electric vehicle is that it is going to have a serious impact on your range. We have this sexy overall profile here, which is obviously there for efficiency, and that is really going to be hampered by sticking a big boxy trailer on the back. So you should logically expect your range to be cut by 1/2 to up to 2/3, depending on what you're towing. That could drop the range down to under 100 miles, depending on exactly what you're doing. You should also know that that's going to have an impact on the overall payload. Payload comes in at 886 pounds total for the Model Y, which is oddly enough a little bit lower than the Model 3. That means that if you're towing about 3,500 pounds and you put the maximum 320 pounds of weight on the tongue, you have just 566 pounds left for you and any belongings on the inside as well as other passengers. Some folks over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos were saying that the Model Y wasn't so much a crossover, it was really more of a sportback that happened to be all-wheel drive and electric. There is some truth to that, of course, but the term crossover doesn't really mean much, so if Tesla wants to call this a crossover, it's as much of a crossover as the Mustang Mach-E. When it comes to ground clearance, we do get a slight improvement over the Model 3, 1.1 inches, so this comes in at 6.6 inches overall off the ground. That's somewhat similar to, for instance, a subcompact Hyundai Kona, which doesn't really have any off-roading aspirations, but this is significantly below the Jaguar I-Pace. With the air suspension, that will jack itself up to about 11 inches, so nearly double what we see in this model. This is also significantly closer to the ground than some of the other luxury options out there, like Volvo's XC60 T8 that has 8.2 inches of clearance, or the Toyota Highlander to my right that comes in at 8 inches overall. And what about the defunct BMW 3 Series GT? Oddly enough, it's almost the same size overall as the Model Y in terms of overall roof height, proportion, vehicle length, etc. It was a little bit longer, but ground clearance was nearly identical. When it comes to front seat comfort, I give these seats 9 out of 10 points. We have a very comfortable base seat design. It's essentially the same seat design that we find in all Model 3s and all Model Ys as well. It's a multi-way power driver's seat. We have a 4-way lumbar support and a powered tilt telescopic steering column. The way that these seats feel reminds me an awful lot of modern Nissan zero-gravity seats, and that is not a dig at Tesla at all. Those are some very comfortable seat designs, and we have a very similar feel over here in the Model Y. Why not 10 out of 10 points? Well, I do have to remove 1 point because these seats are not as adjustable as some of the competitions. We don't have an extending thigh cushion, which is a feature that I would appreciate here. We don't have inflatable bolsters, anything like that going on, and we don't have any available seat massage, features that we do find in the luxury competitors. Hopping in the back seat, the big difference between this and the Model 3 is the overall amount of headroom. The roof has been changed versus that Model 3, so even though it has a similar profile, it's definitely higher off the ground. That gives us 1.7 inches more headroom back here, and that means that I have about 1.5 inches between my head and this glass roof. This likely has something to do with the structure of the vehicle, but interestingly enough, the doors are a little bit thicker than they are in the Model 3, and that reduces hip room across the back seat by nearly 2 inches. And that means that if you have some wider child seats and you're trying to accommodate child seats and adults in the back, this is oddly enough going to be a little bit tighter than the Model 3. But when it comes to headroom, we have absolutely excellent numbers. Combined legroom of 82.3 inches. That means sitting right there behind myself, I have about 4.5 to 5 inches of legroom left. Thanks to the skateboard-like battery pack, we have an absolutely flat floor back here. The rear seats fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back, but I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't attempt something like a Honda Magic seat because there's so much room in this footwell. It would have been interesting to see what would happen if this entire seat could somehow collapse down in there and give us an even bigger cargo area. Tesla wanted to share as many parts with the Model 3 as possible, so that's why when you look at those front seats and that front center console, you'll notice that it really looks like they've just been put on stilts. That's because we have essentially the same seat frames and seat rails that we find in the Model 3 and the same center console. They've just been jacked up a little bit to fit back here. Now, Tesla is saying that the Model Y will be available as a 7-passenger vehicle, and that means that we're going to get 2 tiny seats right back there behind the second row. There's going to be 3 people in the second row, 2 people in the rear. If you choose that option, it is going to be late availability. Supposedly we'll find it sometime in 2021, but let's go ahead and hop back here and see what we might be getting. There are some spy shots of the third row already, so we do know that it's not going to be a rear-facing third row. It is going to be forward-facing right behind these second row seats, and it does look pretty compact. However, if I'm assuming correctly, and my butt is right here on the load floor, I've taken out the top level, so I'm sitting sort of right on this somewhat cushy area right here behind the second row seats. This is probably where that seat's going to be located. Headroom is surprisingly not as bad as I thought. Depending on exactly where the seat back is going to go, obviously your head's probably going to be touching the ceiling as an adult. That's to be expected. And of course your forehead could bump this beam right here. However, it's not quite as tight as you might think because of the way that they've situated everything and the location of the glass itself. It is going to be relatively tight because these wheel wells do intrude pretty far in the cabin. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. I will bring you a video on the actual 3-row Model Y just as soon as one exists, I promise. In the meantime, I have to say, if you're shopping for a Model Y and you're on the fence about whether or not to get the optional third row, I say just get it, because it is not possible for this third row to be as tight or as useless as the third row that we see in the Lexus RXL. And I have to say, if I were to buy a Lexus RX, I would buy the RXL with that emergency third row anyway, because on the off chance you might need to use it, at least it's there. Unfortunately, in the automotive world, manufacturers are not really required to give us detailed specifications for a lot of things on the car. And that's one of the reasons that we don't know legroom figures for a decent number of Mercedes models, for instance. And it's one of the reasons that we don't know exact cargo room figures behind the second row or third row in the Tesla Model Y. Instead, they just give us a figure behind the first row if you have the second row seats completely folded down. And I don't think that's as handy as what's behind the second row. Now, you are able to put a 22-inch roller bag completely under the floor right down here. In fact, I could put it on its side and still close that lid, because we do have a pretty big storage area down there, but it's not big enough to put a spare tire in. In addition to the first underfloor storage area, there is also a second one. That is where the third row seats theoretically would live. Again, although we don't know all the details, I suspect that once that third row is in place, the cargo area is going to stop right about there and be pretty similarly sized to what we see in a Toyota Highlander. Of course, no Tesla would be complete without a frunk, and of course we find one here in the Model Y. There is definitely enough room to put a 22-inch roller bag in this frunk as well, just not quite enough room to put a 24-inch roller bag, so the frunk does not affect our roller bag score. I'm not sure, however, if this 22-inch roller bag will fit in the Mustang's frunk, because it does appear to be a little bit smaller than this. Obviously, the most distinctive thing about this interior is this very large glass roof, a design trait shared with the Tesla Model 3. It's pretty enormous. It goes right there from the driver's seat all the way back there around to the rear seats. I wish that they'd either made the tint a little bit more aggressive, or that they'd employed an LCD function like we see in the upcoming Toyota Venza, and of course some Mercedes products to help dim this, because it does get pretty bright in some high sun situations. I've really noticed that today because it's been pretty toasty here in the Bay Area. Right back there you can see that we have that large beam that's probably going to separate the third row from the second row. If those second row seats are reclined, then your head does end up touching that beam if you're a little bit taller. Up front, we find adjustable height shoulder belts and fixed height headrests. You'll notice that we don't have any perforations in this upholstery because seat ventilation is still something we don't find available in modern Tesla models. Hopefully that's something that they'll rectify at some point. Moving over to the front door panels, we have a large portion of soft touch materials. The bottom section of the door is a hard plastic like we find in most compact luxury vehicles. There's a bottle holder down there, and then we have some imitation suede right there in that center section of the door. Tesla has certainly become known for their minimalist design language, and that continues in this interior. We have a speaker right up there on the A-pillar, and then speakers up there at the top of the dash as well. The bulk of the dashboard is dominated by this large stripe of wood trim that runs from one side all the way to the other, and then the vent right there on top of it. The vents are controlled via the touchscreen infotainment systems. There's no physical vent to twiddle. I have to say that that is one annoyance that I have. I do find myself frequently playing with air vents, and I do find it a little bit annoying to have to go into this system in order to adjust them. Basically, we just click on the climate control setting there. It'll show you where the air is coming out, and you can direct it up, down. You can also go side to side, have them cross over, have it a little bit more forceful right there in front of the steering wheel. Now that is one of the benefits of not having anything in front of the steering wheel, is that you can actually get air coming out right here, right in your face. That is a handy touch. I just wish it was a little bit better controlled. We of course have the large touchscreen infotainment system that Tesla has become known for. In a nutshell, the left sort of 1/3 of the screen is used for the instrument cluster and certain vehicle functions like opening the frunk, the charge door, the trunk, that sort of thing right there, showing you your gear position, cruise control settings, all that sort of stuff. The mapping is done by Google and the database is always online, so it's always current. If we pull this up, you can see our infotainment options, radio, phone, streaming, some built-in apps right there that use the data streaming service as well. One thing you'll notice, however, is that we don't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It's simply not supported in here. It doesn't appear that Elon is interested in giving us that feature in modern Teslas. Another touch that I've always found a little bit odd is that we don't have a 360-degree camera view. It could be that the cameras all around the vehicle aren't designed to give you the same kind of view that we see in cars with 360-degree cameras, but I'm a little bit surprised that we just have that one view right there. Of course, we do have Sentry mode, dash cam mode, all those other kind of features that we come to expect in modern Teslas. If I move up from there, you'll notice one of the flaws in this design that I don't normally talk about, but some folks have been asking me about, and that is rearward visibility. There's not a lot of visibility going on back there. The reason for the lower rearward visibility versus most of the luxury crossovers just seems to be the overall design. Because of that plunging roof line right over there, you don't get much side visibility in that blind spot area, and you don't get too much rearward visibility because of this large glass roof. Again, it is absolutely epic in terms of scale, but you can see that the result is we have that large support beam right there across behind the headrests of the second row seats. And then because of the desire to give the hatch more of a traditional sedan look right down there at the back, you'll notice that even looking right over the rear seat backs, you're looking at that portion of the hatch lid rather than out a window. Back over to the driver's side, there's not too much to look at. We have a round 3-spoke wheel, basically the same as we see in other Tesla models. Over here on this side, we find one of the few buttons that we have in here. This is a windshield wipe button, and then it's also the turn signal stalk. Over here, we have the gear shift stalk, park button right there at the end. Cruise control functions are handled by these buttons over here on the right side of the steering wheel, as well as the stalk. So if we're in drive, we just click down again for the cruise control option, then we press in for park right over there, and you adjust cruise control with these buttons. These buttons over here are infotainment buttons, but they also function to adjust the side view mirrors and the steering wheel itself. I wish we had a few more buttons for some of these features. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. I do find myself adjusting things like the steering column more often maybe than some. Back over to the center console, we have a lot of high gloss plastics. The owner of this car, this is rented through Turo, has actually put a matte finish applique on these. I think that actually improves things a little bit. I kind of wish Tesla had done that. If we lift this up out of the way, we find a very large storage area with 2 USB charge-only ports. This car has a wireless charging mat right there on that. We then have 2 very large cup holders right over here. You can see my wallet right there in the position where the key goes. So in order to start the car, you place your key right there, or you can use the Bluetooth connected app. We then have a large padded center console that opens to reveal a pretty large storage area. Tesla's done a good job at storage all the way around. If you remove that removable divider, you'll notice the storage area continues right there under this section of the dashboard as well, where you can use that to help keep things from sliding around. The glove box is opened via the infotainment system, and as you can see, it is a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside. It is just a little bit too small for that. First, let's start with the numbers. Obviously, as you've come to expect out of a modern Tesla, acceleration is definitely good. We ran 0 to 60 in 4.86 seconds, so generally speaking, we would round that up to the nearest tenth and call this 4.9 seconds. We're within the same range that Tesla's quoting at 4.8, however. In our 60 to 0 braking score, this stops shorter than a Model 3, even though it is a little bit heavier. That's most likely due to the tires. We have 255 width tires on this, 235 width tires on the Model 3, and that's why it took this vehicle 126 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour versus 133 for the last Model 3 that we tested, even though again, this is a few hundred pounds heavier. The battery pack is generally what's referred to as a skateboard-style battery pack. It's completely underneath the vehicle, very similar to what we see in the Mustang Mach-E or, of course, the Jaguar I-Pace. A little bit different than what we see in the Volvo S60 T8. That is a plug-in hybrid, so of course it has a gasoline engine under the hood, and it has a battery pack right next to you in the center console. Tesla fans have noted this for a while, but the battery pack's position largely compensates for the fact that overall curb weight is going to be higher than some of the competitive gasoline vehicles, and the tires are not necessarily as grippy as some of those gasoline competitors either, but because we have that low center of gravity, we get excellent grip as a result. It's obviously a little bit too early to talk about what the Mustang Mach-E is going to handle like, but I do like the way this holds the road a little bit bigger than the Jaguar I-Pace. But the I-Pace is a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more reserved, a little bit more traditionally tuned. The steering in the Model Y is also just a little bit twitchy in my opinion. It's a little bit too direct, a little bit too quick, very similar to what we see in the Model 3. It means that I find myself doing constant little steering corrections as we're going down the road, and it's something that passengers have noticed. It's also something that I've noticed every time I've been in a friend's Model 3 where they're driving, I just assumed that some of our friends were crazy and they just liked steering like that, but it's not. It's the fact that the steering is pretty quick and it's also very direct that leads to these minor course corrections as you're driving along. Out on a rougher road like the road that we're on right now, I'm gonna have to give the ride a C-. And keep in mind that we do have the model with the optional 20-inch tires. Those are really going to impact the overall ride quality. If you're looking for something that's a little bit smoother and that does not transmit all the smaller road imperfections into the cabin, you're probably going to want to go for the 19-inch wheels. As we see in the Model 3, this is definitely tuned towards the firmer side of things. So if you are familiar with German luxury vehicles, this is going to feel quite similar to some of those German options. But it is worth noting that something like an Audi Q5 or the Volvo XC60 or even certain versions of the GLC are going to be a little bit more comfortable when it comes to the overall tuning of the ride. Back out on the paved road, you are certainly going to notice the firm suspension out on a road like this that is roughly paved. The rumor mill tells us that the Model Y was designed to accommodate an adaptive air suspension at some point in the future, but we don't know if or when that feature will ever happen. In our cabin noise testing, we got 72.5 decibels in this cabin at 50 miles an hour. That was a combination of road noise and wind noise. Remember that we do have wider tires in here than we find in the Model 3, so we do get a little bit more road noise into the cabin. And like some Model 3s out there, there's kind of an odd whistle going on right up here where the glass panels meet. And now it's time to talk about efficiency. Don't worry, I have my flame suit on, so fire away down there in the comment section below. When it comes to efficiency, I'm going to have to give this model a B. And that's because it is definitely less efficient than the Tesla Model 3. Over our 2 days of mixed driving so far, and about 200 miles of driving, we've been averaging about 3 miles per kilowatt hour versus almost 4 miles per kilowatt hour in the Tesla Model 3. Now, during my time with the Model Y, it has been relatively warm, so we have been using the air conditioning. I do live up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, obviously keep that in mind. But that means that my real-world range figure for this vehicle is going to come in right around 225 miles, not 316, as possibly promised by Tesla. Remember that vehicles like this don't contain much energy on board. This one has a 75 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. About 72.5 kilowatt-hours of that is usable. That means this is significantly less energy than we find in any other gasoline competitor out there. The battery pack also holds significantly less power than something like a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle would have on tap, even when accounting for the relative lack of efficiency over there on the fuel cell side. And that's why you can comfortably get 380, 390 miles of range in something like a Nexo, over 400 miles of range we're assuming in the upcoming Toyota Mirai. And this vehicle in real-world driving is probably going to be around the 250-mile mark if you're careful, possibly a little bit longer than that if you are truly, truly careful. But for most folks out there, I suspect it's going to be somewhere in that 230 to 250-mile range. Now, the bright side here is that winter range is going to be basically the same because you're going to be using the same system to heat the cabin as I was to cool the cabin. And that's not what we saw in previous generations of Tesla products because, of course, the Model 3 uses a resistive element heater. So in a Model 3, you'll see a much steeper drop in range in the winter than you will in the summer with the air conditioning. And in this vehicle, it should be more or less the same. Before we go, we should talk about regenerative braking because that's something that I've been asked about here. Now, during the time I've had this vehicle, it has been in the light regen brake mode, not the aggressive regen brake mode because this is the mode that I prefer. Tesla does not employ a blended regen system. So at the moment, we're slowing down via the regen braking, and this is all the regen that we're going to get. If I press on the brake pedal, we don't get any more regen. This is not a blended system like we find in the Prius or the Porsche Taycan or other EVs out there. And you can see that we will slowly crawl to just about a stop right there. But of course, taking off is a bit more fun than braking. So how much will a Model Y set you back? Well, they start at $41,000. That is for the smaller battery pack and rear-wheel drive. If you want the longer range battery pack and the all-wheel drive system that we have on this model, that will add $12,000 to your price tag, and this particular model out the door was $56,000. Keep that price tag in mind because that's very important when we start talking about the competition. First, let's define what that might be. Obviously, the Mustang Mach-E is going to be a very direct competitor to this. It's going to be out later in 2020. We're told possibly early 2021 because of some possible delays there due to the whole coronavirus shutdown. Something like a Volvo XC60 T8 could be a competitor if you're looking for something that has a plug, but maybe you don't want to go completely gas-free. Then, of course, we have the Mercedes EQC, the I-Pace, and the e-tron. Let's pop those prices up now, but the big thing to keep in mind here is that all of these have a federal tax credit applicable to them, and we don't have one over here on the Tesla Model Y. But to be fair to everybody, these prices are including that maximum federal tax credit that will depend on your financial situation, of course. However, even when you take a look at those numbers, you'll notice that the Model Y is a pretty darn good deal. Only the Mustang Mach-E really undercuts this at $36,395. Depending on exactly how you have that Mustang Mach-E configured, it is going to be less than a corresponding Model Y. Now that is kind of logical, of course, because that's not a luxury vehicle. Even though it is a very nice Ford, it still has a Ford logo on the front. It's not going to be found at a Lincoln dealer. Honestly, I think it was a little bit odd that it didn't end up being a Lincoln, but hey, what do I know over there at Ford's marketing and PR. The next closest and perhaps the most interesting competitor, I think, is the Volvo XC60 T8, because 0 to 60 performance times are very similar to this model right here. It is all-wheel drive, but of course, it has a gasoline engine. It is not full electric. So that's the kind of car you want to look at if you're interested in mitigating your gasoline usage but not eliminating it. Say you want to have that 400 or 500 mile range. You want to be able to go to a gas station, but you want to be able to suck down electrons when they're available. You might want to go there. If you want to go completely gas-free, obviously that's not going to do it for you. You might want something like the Model Y, but this is going to be a little bit more expensive when comparably equipped to the Volvo XC60 T8. It's also worth noting that as a more traditional luxury car, the Volvo's going to have a lot of options available that we don't find on the Tesla. Ventilated seats, massaging seats, a cover to the sunroof rather than having just a piece of glass that is open all the time. There are also going to be things like extending thigh cushions available, stitched leather dashboards, upgraded leather upholstery, a boxier cargo area in the back. Then we have the rest of the luxury competition that is a full EV, and they're all going to be more expensive. The Mercedes-Benz EQC starts at $60,400, and that is after the federal tax credit. This one again, $41,000, no federal tax credit going on right there. Jaguar I-Pace, $62,350 after federal tax credit. At least it will be faster than this model. 0 to 60 about 4 seconds in that Jaguar I-Pace. This one over here again about 4.9. As far as the direct competition, that really is it, because the Audi e-tron is in really a different category, arguably. It is larger than this. It is sort of a two-row competitor in some ways, perhaps maybe to a Tesla Model X. Any way you slice it, it's going to be more expensive. $67,300 after federal tax credit. It is bigger on the outside, and it definitely feels bigger on the inside. It feels like a larger, more grown-up crossover. So in my mind, it's not the most direct competitor to the Model Y. I have to say that I love the I-Pace styling on the outside, and I love the way the interior is finished. It is definitely done with more precision than Tesla has been able to muster on the Model Y. When it comes to fit and finish, materials quality, etc., the I-Pace definitely is nicer. However, the infotainment system is not quite as good as what we find in the Model Y, even though it may have Apple CarPlay. It's just not as easy to use as the system. It's also laggy, etc. And this definitely feels more futuristic on the inside. And again, it's also going to be notably cheaper than that Jaguar I-Pace. If my own money were on the line right now, I suspect I might lean towards the Mustang Mach-E because of its lower price tag. Again, it will start less than this model right here, and approximately comparably equipped, it will be a little bit less expensive after the federal tax credit as well. Now, if you don't qualify for that federal tax credit, then this is going to be a better deal. But most folks out there that are shopping for a crossover in the $40,000 to $50,000 or $60,000 range are probably going to be qualifying for that full federal tax credit. Of course, the key problem for that Mustang Mach-E is that it doesn't exist yet, and it won't until later this year. So let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you pick if your own cash were on the line? Would you get this, or would you get that Mustang Mach-E? I think those really are the two toughest competitors in this segment. The Jaguar I-Pace is an interesting option for someone that's looking for a bit more, but I think that I might get the Model Y or the Mustang Mach-E over it. Let me know what you think about that down there. Find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Instagram, and I'll see all of you later.